So, this is narrative telephone. The rules are quite basic. One person records themselves telling a short story. They pass that video on to someone else. That person watches the video once, and then tries to tell the story from their memory. They pass their video on to someone else. They repeat the same story, and then eventually, after everyone has tried repeating the story from their memory, we sit back and watch the disaster and enjoy.
Okay, let's begin. There was once an elven prince named Nasturtium who wanted nothing more than to impress his father, the king, and prove to him that he would one day make a good ruler. But the king told his son that he would only be deserving of the crown once he had shown that he was both wily and brave. One day the prince was riding in the woods when a peasant approached him and bowed to one knee. "Your Majesty, every month our farms are being attacked and our sheep and chickens are being taken. Please, can you ask the king to help us?" But the prince saw this as an opportunity. Nasturtium headed into the deepest forest and after 3 days found the tracks of a wild beast. Following the tracks, the young prince came upon a massive wolf. Without hesitation, Nasturtium drew his swords and attacked, and after a grueling battle with the prince struck a mortal blow. But the wolf began to change, its skin and bones stretching and distorting into a human form, that of his father, the king. With his dying breath, the king whispers, "You are truly both wily and brave, and are now worthy of the crown." Good luck.
There once was a prince called Nasturtium, and his father was a king. And the king said to the prince, "You can receive the throne one day, as long as you prove yourself to be wily and clever." And the prince was like, "Okay, I want that. I want to be king." So the prince was just out and about. He was in the woods one day and he came across a humble peasant, and the peasant said, "Oh, Prince Nasturtium, please help us. There's a monster deep in the forest." So the prince thought, "I should try and help this man," rode into the forest. Once in the forest, he saw a horrible dark monster made of shadow and fire, and he took his sword out and slew the monster. There was a wild fight beforehand, and the prince, wounded, got off his horse to inspect the dead monster, at which point it turned into his father, the king, who said, "Ah, Prince Nasturtium, you have been wily and clever. You may now receive the throne."
There once was a prince named Nasturtium, whose father was the king. The king said to Nasturtium, "If you want to inherit the throne, you must be wily and clever." Nasturtium thought, "Yes, I do want to inherit," so he set off on his horse into the woods. He was riding along and met a peasant. The peasant ran up and said, "Oh, Prince Nasturtium, please help us. There's a monster in the woods." So he rode further into the woods and came across this dark monster that was all shadow and fire. Prince Nasturtium slew the monster. So there was a fight, and then once he'd slain the monster, he got off his horse to check to see if he was dead, and the monster turned into his father. And the dying king said to him, "Ah, yes, Prince Nasturtium, you have been both wily and clever. You may inherit the throne."
Once there was a prince called Nasturtia, which I think is a kind of flower, and his dad said to him, "You need to be wily and clever if you want to inherit the throne." And he thought, "Well, yeah, I do want to inherit the throne." So he went off riding into some dark woods on a horse. The dark woods made up a forest, which apparently was a clever thing to do. And then he came across a monster that was all shadow and fire. It's fortunate it was partly made of fire because it was dark, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see it. Anyway, he got into a fight with the monster and he slew it, and it turned into his dad. And his dad said, "You'd be wily and clever, Nasturtia, so yeah, you get to inherit the kingdom and stuff." And that was it.
Okay, so I just heard this amazing story in which it's a story about a prince, and his name was Nasturtium. And he's talking to his dad, the king, and the king's all like, hey, so you to inherit my kingdom, you have to go to the woods and do a thing. Nasturtium is all like, yeah, okay, I'll go to the woods. And what do I need to do there? And the king is like, you have to kill a beast that you'll find there. So after Nasturtium goes to the woods, it's sort of like dark, shadowy, gloomy woods. And then he's going there, and then this thing emerges, a monster composed of smoke and fire. It's so the fire is illuminating the smoke in the dark, shadowy woods. Presumably, there's a lot of like canopy, and yeah, so they get into it, like, and Nasturtium hammers the monster, and then the monster dies and transforms into his dad, the king, and then the king is like, cool, man, you did it, and is very pleased with his son. Nasturtium's kind of happy about this, Prince Nasturtium. I guess he inherits the kingdom and becomes King Nasturtium. Don't know what happened to the dad. Retired or something. That's just the story I heard about it.
So here goes. Once upon a time, because all stories start once upon a time, don't they? The guy before me didn't say once upon a time, but I had him taken out the back and killed. So once upon a time, there was a prince, Prince Nasturtium, the rather wonderfully named Prince Nasturtium, and he had a slightly strained relationship with his dad, the king. So he went off to the king, and the king said, if you want to inherit the kingdom, my son, you must go into the dark, deep woods and kill a dark, deep monster in the dark, deep woods for me. Obviously, Prince Nasturtium thought this was rather strange, but off he went nonetheless to the woods, into the deep, dark woods, and in the middle of the deep, dark woods, he found a monster made of smoke and fire, crackling and burning and guttering and casting all sorts of strange shadows all over the wood. What then happened was an epic battle, the likes of which we've probably never seen before or since. Still, in the end, the valiant Prince Nasturtium managed to vanquish this evil monster of smoke and fire. But what happened next? The strangest thing. The monster of smoke and fire, upon its defeat, and the valiant Prince Nasturtium standing over the body, who did it turn into? But the king himself. The king then heartily congratulated his son for completing a completely strange and pointless quest, and said that the keys to the kingdom were his, upon which point the king retired, the prince became King Nasturtium, and they all lived happily ever after. Or at least I've tacked that bit on, because again, stories should have that bit, and the guy before didn't have that bit. Poor luck for him.
And here we are. Are you sitting comfortably? Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom a long, long time ago, there was a brave and noble, handsome knight, the son of the king, the Prince Nasturtium. A brave fellow, and looking forward to one day ruling the kingdom. However, he did not have the best of relationships with his father, the king. And one day, when he was a grown man, he approached his father, and his father said, you must go on a quest for me, son. If you wish to one day inherit the keys to the kingdom and be king of the land, you must go from this place, henceforth, to the deep, dark woods. And there, in the deep, dark woods, you will find a strange and fickle creature, a monster in the deep, dark woods, which you must fight and vanquish. Well, Prince Nasturtium, brave fellow this was, of course, armed himself and headed into the forest. As he rode through the deep, dark wood, he saw ahead of him a flickering light and a creature made of smoke and fire, cackling and heading towards him, and they fought a battle of which a mere mortal like myself could never hope to describe in true detail exactly the thrust and parry, the flames, the fire, the strange shadows that were cast around them as they fought in man upon beast, until eventually Prince Nasturtium himself was triumphant, standing above the body of his fallen foe. He was surprised, in fact mesmerised, to see the smoke and fire fade from the form of the defeated monster, to reveal, in fact, no one else except his own father, the king. Congratulating his son on his bravery and strength of arms, he told him immediately he would henceforth be the king of the country, giving him the keys to the kingdom, and he took his place rightfully as the king of the land. And of course everyone, from that point on, lived happily ever after.
Hello. Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, and a long, long time ago, there lived a prince. And the prince's name was Nasturtium. And he had a patriarchal father who was stern and forthright and inflexible and unyielding. And one day his father came to Nasturtium and said, "It is my desire that you inherit my kingdom, and you inherit the people that you will govern and the rules you will decide upon that is the difference between life and death for these people. And the only true way of understanding whether you are fit for this is through mortal combat, because the only way to truly understand how to rule is figuring out whether you can kill. So, what you must do is quite simple. What you must do is you must go into the Forest of Doom. In the Forest of Doom lies a terrible creature of shadow and flame. And you must defeat this awful creature to make the kingdom safe for those who live here and who we protect and tax." So, Prince Nasturtium strapped on his vorpal sword, which would go swicker swacker when the time was right. And this vorpal sword was black, and sometimes it sung. So it was just like the ultimate magical sword. He strapped that on. He put on his fine cloak of red velvet. He got on his fine charger, and he went into the Forest of Doom. After several hours of riding through the difficult and treacherous woods, which is quite difficult on a horse, and he kept on having to remove his hat because it had many tears and it was constantly getting knocked off, he finally came across a grotto, and standing in the middle of the grotto, he thought was a patch of darkness. Very strange. And from this patch of darkness emerged a monstrous creature with eyes of fire, a flaming sword, bat wings, a whip of terror. But he didn't fear this creature, and he stepped forward. And there was a tremendous battle. It went backwards and forwards, and it seemed for minutes, perhaps hours, that the prince would be defeated. But slowly he beat back this creature, this this spirit of shadow and fire, and eventually he overcame it, and he stood above it with his black vorpal sword, singing many, many songs, and dashed it upon its head. The moment he did that, the flame and the shadow dissipated and disappeared into nothing. And beneath him was his father, who was mortally wounded. And his father looked up to him and he said, "Son, you have made me pleased and proud. For as I lie here dying, I know that you will be as good, if not better, a tyrant to our people than I ever was. And it makes me glad to know that you at least will live happily ever after."
Thank you, Sasha. That was something. Right, so Nasturtium is a prince, and his father sets him a challenge to go out and slay a monster to save the kingdom and to prove that he's worthy of reigning over this kingdom. And so he has to go out into the Forest of Doom to slay a fiery monster. And he rides, he's got a black vorpal sword and a red cloak and a hat of some description. And he mounts his steed to ride into the Forest of Doom to slay the monster. His hat keeps getting knocked off because he didn't think about his wardrobe before this challenge. Puts the hat back on, carries on. Well done. He comes to a clearing, and there's a dark, shady bit. And out of the dark, shady bit comes the monster with the flaming eyes and a flaming sword and a whip and bat wings. And he fights the monster with his fiery sword? His sword. They go back and forth, and it's not looking good for our hero, Nasturtium. But he prevails in the end, and as he slays the monster, it dissipates, and it's his father. And his father says, "Well done, son. I know I'm leaving the kingdom in good hands with you, and you're going to make a fantastic tyrant one day, or soon. And at least you'll be the only one happy." So, moral of the story.